Okay, so let's talk about some of the consequences of cultural relativism. Because the bottom line is, we do in fact, I think, encounter cultural relativism more than we might be aware of it. Every time you tend to think, oh, well, that culture thinks that's okay. I'm awfully glad I don't live here because my culture does. I don't live there because my culture doesn't think that's okay. But that culture says it's okay, so for them it's okay. We've all kind of heard things like this before, right? Well, let's think about what happens if cultural relativism is true. What are the consequences of cultural relativism? Now, just to be clear, the word consequences can mean just about anything, okay? Consequences are just the results, the things that come out of something, okay? So that there are consequences to cultural relativism doesn't entail cultural relativism is going to fail. But if you find these consequences unsavory, you might be inclined to ditch cultural relativism. Does that make sense? Okay, so first and foremost, if cultural relativism is true, then cultures are morally infallible. Okay? For those of you who missed that on your SATs, infallible means can't be mistaken. Okay? If cultural relativism is true, cultures are morally infallible. This means that no culture has ever been mistaken about a moral principle. Your culture used to think that sacrificing babies was okay, then it was okay. And they were not mistaken. Your culture used to think that it's morally permissible to own other people. They were not mistaken. In that culture, it was perfectly permissible to own other people. Okay? So cultures are morally infallible if cultural relativism is true. There is no being mistaken within a culture. What do you think about that? I mean, that seems problematic, right? Because it seems like there have been cultures that have been incorrect about morality. Our culture did used to think it was morally permissible to own other people, and we think that they were mistaken in that. There are cultures out there who think it's morally impermissible for women to leave their house without being covered head to toe and being accompanied by a male member of their family. We think that culture is mistaken. The Nazi culture thought it was permissible to commit genocide. We tend to think that culture was mistaken. We're hoping current German culture agrees that was mistaken. But if cultural relativism is true, that couldn't possibly be the case. Those societies were not mistaken. Okay? Next, there's no moral progress. If cultural relativism is true, there's no progressing within morality. Moral progress tends to mean that we're moving towards something right, or we're moving towards something better. If I make moral progress, then I am becoming a better person. If my society makes moral progress, then I'm becoming a better person. I'm sorry, that my society is becoming a better society. But if cultural relativism is true, that's just simply not the case. There's no progress because there's no better. According to cultural relativism, every moral judgment is equal. The judgment to murder an innocent person for their money is equal to the judgment to not kill an innocent person for their money. Okay? These are morally on par. These are morally equal if cultural relativism is true. So there's no better. There's no right. And that means there's no possibility of moral progress. Our culture doesn't believe it's morally permissible to own people now. Awesome. For us, at least, right? But we're not better. than we were 250 years ago. We're just different. Okay? But that doesn't seem right. It seems like working to abolish slavery, working to implement civil rights is progress. We want to say that our culture has improved. Hey, we've got a lot of work to do. Let's not misunderstand. But there has been improvement. 300 years ago, whole groups of people could not own property. They could not vote. And I'm not just talking about African Americans. I'm talking about women as well. It was not okay. And we tend to think that the fact that we have equal rights, everybody has the right to vote, everybody has the right to own property, we tend to think that's better. Okay? And finally, if cultural relativism is true, social reformers are bad people. Okay? Remember that if I disagree with my society about a moral claim, then I'm wrong. Okay? If everybody in my society thinks murder's wrong and I think murder's okay, I'm wrong. But it goes the other way too. If everybody in my society, if the culture thinks that murder's okay and I think murder's wrong, I'm wrong. So people who set forth to change society, who try to bring about reform, who try to implement civil rights, these are people who disagree with their culture, and those are people who are wrong. They're bad people. We should not look up to them. We should not revere them. Okay? Because the bottom line is if cultural relativism is true, Rosa Parks needed to sit her butt on the back of the bus, and Martin Luther King Jr. needed to sit down and shut up. Mahatma Gandhi needed to eat a sandwich. Okay? And that doesn't seem right. Right? Martin Luther King Jr. just doesn't seem like a bad person. You know, Reverend King just doesn't seem like the sort of person we ought to call a bad person. You know, advocating for peaceful, the idea, peaceful, wow, y'all, my brain just went blank. Advocating for peaceful sit-ins, and that's not the word I was looking for, to fight for change, but to do it in a peaceful fashion, marches and sit-ins, not, riots and guns. Really? That's a bad person? Mahatma Gandhi protested, that was the word I was looking for, peacefully protest. Mahatma Gandhi protested British imperialism in India by going on a hunger strike. He brought such attention to himself that there was pressure placed on England to remove themselves from the country. And, he seemed to have done a good job because that's what happened. But he's a bad person. So the consequences of cultural relativism are these things. Now, if you find these consequences unsavory, if you don't like them, then you're going to ditch cultural relativism. You're not going to be a cultural relativist. Now, if you're really, really, really attached to cultural relativism, you have to get on board with these consequences. Yep, cultures, they're never mistaken. Nope, no such thing as progress, only difference. Martin Luther King Jr., bad guy. Let's get rid of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So, these are the consequences of cultural relativism.